and into the blood. And it's an amazing process, not often understood. So we're going to be starting with the mouth. And the mouth is actually the only part of the whole of the gastrointestinal tract that we have say over. We have say over 5 things. We have say over what goes in. Is it the best organic food prepared in a healthful manner, or is it just fast food, devitalised food? We have say over what goes in. We have say over how long it's in the mouth. Is it chew, chew, swallow, chew, chew, swallow, chew, chew, swallow, or is it chew, 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 until it's broken down to a cream, then swallowed? Have you heard the old saying, we should chew our drinks and drink our foods? Meaning, and we say this to our guests, when they have juices, they're to have a mouthful and swish it a bit, chew it a bit, and then swallow it, and that'll warm it a little and let some of the enzymes in the mouth start to break down some of the sugars in there. And we should chew our food until it's almost a cream. My husband does everything fast. He drives very fast, and I don't mind because I like fast. Things happen with Michael, and he also eats a little bit too fast. And so at the mealtime, and I know he's got his mind on a whole lot of things and the food's going down fast, so I just touch his arm and smile. And he looks at me and goes, oh. And then he chews. And sometimes when he's finished his meal, he says, I won, first finished, I won. I said, no, you lost. That means you didn't chew it properly. Because there's no teeth in the stomach, have you noticed? So the only place we can effectively and efficiently chew is in the mouth. And there are 2 foods that begin their breakdown in the mouth. So let's have a look at, wrong one, just bear with me, I'm getting used to this. So we're going to look at the mouth first, and the mouth, must be this one, mouth, yes. So the mouth, 5 things. Number 1, we choose what goes in, we choose how long it's in the mouth, we choose how often it goes in. Is it every half hour, is it every 2 hours, or is it just at meal times? Number 4 is we choose how much goes in. Is it 4 platefuls of food, or is it 1 reasonable plateful of food? And as you will see, as we go down this gastrointestinal tract, these 5 decisions affect the whole of the way down. And the 5th one is we choose the environment of entry. All controversial issues should not be discussed at the table, because it effectively certainly blocks digestion. Have you ever had bad news in the middle of a meal? You don't feel like the rest of the meal, do you? No, because stress, anxiety blocks the release of our digestive enzymes. Now, what are the 2 foods that are broken down in the mouth? First of all, we'll look at the pH of the mouth, which is alkaline. And as you will see as we go down the gastrointestinal tract, the only part of the whole of the body is acid is the stomach. So the mouth environment is alkaline. Now we're going to have a look at the enzyme. There's actually 2 that are released in the mouth. And then we're going to have a look at the food. So the enzymes that are released in the mouth, one is released underneath the tongue from the sublingual gland, and it's called lingual lipase. And lingual lipase is the enzyme that breaks down saturated fat. The unsaturated fat, it's broken down further on, but it is the saturated fat is quite unique in that the breakdown begins in the mouth. And we've been spun many myths over the last 30, 40 years, and one is that fat is the enemy. Are you starting to realise that it's not the enemy? One nutritionist said that it's going to take a whole nother generation to get fat phobia out of the brain. No, fat is actually an essential nutrient in the body, and the saturated fat is a remarkable fat because its breakdown begins in the mouth. So it's one of the easiest on digestion. And did you know that there's no proof that saturated fat causes heart disease? Just by the way. So let's define the saturated fat. Butter is a saturated fat, ghee is a saturated fat, shea butter, also palm oil, coconut oil, they're all saturated fats. And in some nuts there's a part that's saturated fat. In macadamia there's more saturated fat probably than some other nuts. But the saturated fat, again, is unique because the breakdown begins in the mouth under the action of lingual lipase. The other enzyme that is released in the mouth is a salivary amylase called ptyalin. And ptyalin is the enzyme that breaks down starch. But there is very little ptyalin in the mouth of a baby because all the baby has is milk. Now, the first teeth that a baby gets is 4 at the top and 4 at the bottom, and they're called milk teeth. And they're traditionally called milk teeth because that should be baby's main food is milk. A baby should not eat any food till there are 3 main signs. 1, they can sit. 2, they can feed themselves. And 3, they've got some teeth. And you know, common sense isn't very common today. But that's pretty common sense, isn't it? But still, the baby's main food should be milk because they have milk teeth. Now, when do they appear? They appear around 7, 8 months of age, maybe the whole 8 are through by about 12 months of age. But that's also taste time. Baby can sit by then. Baby can feed themselves. So give them a piece of cucumber. Taste time. And they'll chew away at that cucumber while you eat your meal, and little bits of cucumber will be all over the table and little bits of cucumber all over the floor, and a few bits go in, and that's perfectly fine. It's just taste time. Because what's their main food? Milk. Milk. A bit of celery. Maybe a piece of apple. Maybe a piece of orange. And oh, they'll have such fun with that. But that's just they're getting their taste for it. The next teeth that come through are the molars. They come through back here, and they don't come through between 14, maybe 22 months of age. What do molars do? They grind. What do we grind? Grain. And it's not until those molars are fully through, then the salivary amylase ptyalin is released. Do you remember the psalm we looked at last night, Psalm 146 verse 3, that said, "Put not your trust in princes, neither in the Son of Man, in whom there is no help." Who are the princes? They're the authorities in the field. Now, what do the authorities in the field of pediatrics, maybe the nurses, the doctors, what are they telling young mothers to give babies? 4 to 6 months of age. Rice cereal. Okay, students, what's rice cereal? Pure starch. Why do they tell them to do that? And the baby can't sit, so the baby lies down. And you know that when a baby is sucking milk, they use their tongue and their top lip. And the first spoon of slop, that's what I call it, that goes into the mouth, the baby goes like that and it pops straight out. Have you noticed? Yeah. And what does the mother do? Scoop it up and put it back in. I tell you what, don't make any sense to me. But she's listened to the princes. You see, in the first 6 months, iron in breast milk is quite substantial. But in the second 6 months, it's much lower. So the princes have come to the conclusion that breast milk in the second 6 months of life is not enough. Has God made a mistake? No. Does God make mistakes? Not at all. Not at all. And since time dawns, babies are being fed breast milk often till they're 3 or 4 or 5 years of age. And from those generations, we got Einstein, we got Rembrandt, we got Mozart. Were they dumb? No. No, they were not dumb. And yet the mother's told, if you don't give your baby extra, because there's not enough iron in the milk, the baby's brain might not develop, the baby's body might not develop. So the mother does it because of fear. Please don't do anything because of fear. Have you noticed how much a baby grows in the first 6 months to how much a baby grows in the second 6 months? This is not rocket science. No, the baby's need for iron in the second 6 months isn't as much as the baby's need in the first 6 months. Now, I first heard this when I was only 23 with my first baby. A friend of mine, he was in charge of the malabsorption syndrome ward in Children's Hospital, biggest one in Australia. He said, this ward is full of babies who've been given starch too young. And so I didn't give my baby starch. In fact, my son James, he was not interested in any food till he was 16 months old. Here's James, little toddler running around, never eaten food. Maybe he sucked on a bit of celery now and then. Did he suffer? Well, he's a master builder now. He's an incredible musician on the panpipes. He's an artist, looks like a bodybuilder, doesn't seem to have suffered. This is not rocket science, and you know, God gave parents the authority over their children. So please don't let anyone intimidate you with fear, because we are what we are today, often because of the way we're fed as babies. And I was reading some reports of dentists who are saying teeth and gums and jaws aren't developing properly because babies have been given slop and they don't chew. But when you give a little one at 7, 8, 9 months of age a piece of cucumber, a piece of celery, that's when they chew. And you see that chewing reflex gets stronger and stronger. Did you know the strongest muscle in the body is the masseter muscle that sits right there? Experience it when you chew on the nut. Whew, don't get your finger in there or your finger will be... It's a strong muscle, and it's important because the development of these muscles actually influences the development of our whole face and even can affect the way we breathe. So let's move on down. We come through a little valve here, and that little valve is called the cardiac sphincter. And it's called the cardiac sphincter because of its nearness to the cardiac muscle. When you swallow, it's an amazing thing swallowing. When you swallow, it closes the trachea, which goes down into your lungs, and it allows the food to go into the esophagus. And the swallowing process triggers the esophagus to start moving, and it moves that food down. And that cramp, or that clamping backwards and forwards, that muscular action, bringing the food down, stimulates the cardiac sphincter to open because it's a muscle, and the food goes into the stomach. But there are some people today who are suffering from something called reflux or heartburn, which, you see, the only part of the body that should be acid is the stomach. And the stomach must be acid because the stomach needs acid, or an acid environment, for the enzymes to work. But in some cases, the acid's coming up. And if someone has heartburn or reflux and they go to the princes, what do the princes give them? Antacids. Well, what's going to break the food down now? Do you know what that's like doing? The cows keep coming into my garden. So my husband shoots the cow. Stop shooting the cows, just shut the gate. Just shut the gate. Don't shoot the acid, shut the gate. Shut the gate. The problem's not the acid. If someone says, I've got a very acid stomach, I say, congratulations. You must be digesting your food very, very well, because that's what the stomach does. And it needs acid to be able to do that. No, the problem's the gate. What's happening with many people, you've heard the old saying, we should eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, tea like a pauper, or supper you call it like a pauper. One lady said, what do paupers eat? I said, sometimes nothing. Many people in Australia, and I know also in the US today, they're eating breakfast like a pauper, lunch like a pauper, and the supper is the king and the queen together. And then they lie down in the easy chair and gravity, fall asleep, gravity pushes that food against that cardiac sphincter, and week after week, after month, after year after year, it's weakening that cardiac sphincter. That's one reason. And it's a muscle. And when it's relaxed, it's closed. And when it tightens, it opens. So if someone's stressed out, what's that going to do? It's going to cause it to open. We've had many people come to our retreat with reflux or heartburn, and they go home without it. Because we serve breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, and yes, it's pitiful what we give them at night. But they're not interested because they're well satisfied. And we give them magnesium, because remember, that's a muscle, and magnesium is a muscle relaxant. Now we're moving into the stomach. So I'm going to move on a little bit here because I want to draw the stomach for you. The stomach is lined with folds, and these folds look like this. And these folds are such that when we have a meal in our stomach, they're able to stretch out. But these folds are lined with glands, and 2/3 of these glands release mucus. And that's a thick mucosa lining to protect the stomach lining from what's released down here. And what's released from these parietal glands is hydrochloric acid and also pepsinogen. And pepsinogen and hydrochloric acid unite, and the union of these two releases pepsin. And pepsin is the enzyme that breaks down protein. Hydrochloric acid, if one drop were to go in your skin, it would burn a hole in your skin. But God, in his wisdom and mercy, put in the lining of the stomach sodium bicarbonate. So if any hydrochloric acid happens to seep through, then the sodium bicarbonate neutralizes it. But that thick mucosa lining the stomach is 99% water. And so if someone is dehydrated, they can lose that thick mucosa lining. They can even lose the sodium bicarbonate that is in that mucosa lining. We have a book in our library at home called One of the Body's Many Cries for Water. It's by Dr. Batman Geheldich, we'll just call him Dr. B. And he's an Iranian doctor. And he claims that by the time he wrote his book, he'd cured 3,000 cases of stomach ulcer with water alone. Because the first thing it would do, give a glass of water, and it would thicken that mucosa lining. That's cheap medicine, isn't it? Just water alone. We need water between meals to be able to replace those gastric enzymes. And we need to stop drinking water with the meal, because when we drink water with the meal, it dilutes the pepsinogen and the hydrochloric acid. And if they happen to unite and release some pepsin, that pepsin can only work in a very acid environment. So many people have digestive problems today because they're drinking with their meals, and it's such a habit. It's such an American habit, it's such an Australian habit. In fact, when we go to a restaurant, what's the first thing you're asked? What will you drink? And if you say no thanks, they say, oh, well, we'll just bring your water. Well, we let them, otherwise they don't leave us alone. But when you drink a glass of water half an hour before the meal, what you do is you thicken that mucosa wall, that protective wall on the lining of the stomach. I have never met anyone with too much acid in their stomach, but I've met many people that don't have enough acid. So I'm going to tell you a story. It's a fascinating story. It's about a young man in the late 1700s who sustained a gunshot wound to his stomach. And a Dr. Beaumont was called. And the Dr. Beaumont was only 25 at the time. Alexis St. Martin, who got the gunshot, it was an accident. Don't know how that happened, but anyway, blasted out part of his stomach. He was in a bad way, as you can imagine. Some of his ribs were blasted out. And Dr. Beaumont said he would not live, but every day he was recovering. Twice a tumour arose, burst, and a 2-inch piece of rib came out. What an amazing body we have. Why did the tumour rise up? To release and get rid of that piece of rib. We've forgotten to trust the body, haven't we? Just imagine if it was today and he was given antibiotics and the tumour keeps rising to try and get rid of the rib, but the antibiotics keep pushing it back. Ever after, though, after he healed, he had a hole in his stomach. And it was like a little mouth. And Dr. Beaumont saw his opportunity and he offered Alexis a job at his place to just chop wood and do menial things around the house. So we're getting into the early 1800s now. You see, the book that I read was written in 1844. And so Dr. Beaumont meticulously documented his findings. He'd get a piece of silk thread, put a bit of food on it and put it in the hole, pull it out an hour later, put it back in the hole, pull it out an hour later. And what he found, that on a whole, digestion took 3.5 to 4 hours. Now, obviously, it's not going to take that long if the person just has a few slices of watermelon. This was with the 3 essential food groups. So the 3 essential food groups are fibre. What fibre does is it slowly releases the glucose. Protein, and as you will see as I go through what happens in the stomach, it is in the stomach that protein is broken down. So when you've got protein in your meal, it keeps the food in the stomach a little longer. And fat. There are fats that heal, but there are fats that kill. The killer fats are the altered fats, the fats that have gone through a lot of processing. So the fats that have stood the test of time are coconut oil, olive oil, also fats in your nuts and your seeds. In fact, the heart disease really started around the Industrial Revolution, and that's when they developed high heat equipment and chemicals to get oils out of hard seeds. You see, traditionally women could extract coconut oil in their kitchens. Olive oil, they had presses in their houses because they're the 2 oils that are extracted from the flesh of the plant. So when you go into the supermarket, when you see the cheapest oils in clear plastic bottles, what's that? Soy oil, canola oil, peanut oil, safflower oil, don't touch them. They are the ones that are very detrimental to the human body. Your body almost doesn't recognise them. And it doesn't matter if they're in a clear plastic bottle because they're already totally destroyed. So there are good fats. And when the meal contains those 3 essential food groups, then digestion can take 3.5 to 4 hours. And then the stomach likes a rest. Poor old stomach, it doesn't often get this. A 1-hour rest, what does that equal? That equals approximately 5 hours between meals. In fact, I was just talking to a lady today, she's in her 40s, she said, that's how I grew up. I grew up with 2 meals a day. She said we'd have breakfast at 8, we'd have lunch at 2, and we wouldn't eat again till the next day. She said, I thought everyone in the world ate like that. But do you know there's a form of eating today called time-restricted eating, and time-restricted eating is, among the nutritionists, the most popular form of eating today. It came out of the 5-2 diet, the intermittent fasting, and it's eating twice in a 24-hour period, 6 hours apart. So this lady in her 40s who grew up with this, she said, my mum and dad grew up with the book by Ellen White, The Ministry of Healing. And that's what she said, eat breakfast like a king. And that's the old saying, that just didn't come from her. Breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, tea like a pauper. Yesterday I had breakfast like a king, yesterday I had lunch like a queen, and I didn't eat again till breakfast the next day. Do you sleep well? See, when you go to sleep at night, your body wants to sleep too, your stomach wants to sleep. But my sons, They get up early to go to work, they're tradesmen, they've got their own businesses, so they have breakfast at 6:30. Well, they're going to need to eat at midday, and they're going to need to eat again at 6 o'clock at night. But they work physically hard and they're built like this. So it all depends on you. That's why you're the doctor. You've got to do what works well for you. But what Dr. Beaumont found, remember the guy who's doing experiments on Alexis at Martin's stomach, he found that there were 5 things that caused the food to be still in the stomach 8 hours later. So what's delaying digestion? Number one that really delayed digestion was if he often ate. See, what happens is, when digestion takes 3.5 to 4 hours, if some more food goes in after 2 hours, then the original food that's get broken down has to be put on hold, then the newcomer has to be dealt with, and the little valve at the bottom of the stomach stays shut. And it'll stay shut until the new food's broken down to the same state. And then it'll open. And then an hour later, lunch comes in. Oh, pyloric sphincter shuts the shop because something's just come in, not broken down. And that explains why still, after 8 hours, there can still be some remnants of breakfast. And in my next lecture, I'll be looking at diabetes. What have diabetics been told for the last 30 years? Eat every 2 hours? The prince has got it wrong again. Now, have you noticed they don't say, sorry, we were wrong? What do they say? New research reveals. Eating breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, and tea like a pauper, that's not new news. That's a saying that's been around for hundreds of years. What also caused the food to be still in the stomach 8 hours later, if he drank large amounts with meals. Now, if you're thirsty with a meal, obviously a mouthful or two is not going to make a big difference. It was more glasses, copious amounts of water. If someone's thirsty when they're eating, it's a clear indication that they sat to the meal dehydrated. So if you can't remember it, put an alarm clock on your phone or somewhere, ding, 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 an hour before the meal, then drink the water, drink, drink, drink. Also, if he overate, Dr. Beaumont came to the conclusion that only so much food can be broken down in the stomach. And when you overload it, then it's very hard for the digestive enzymes to break it down effectively and efficiently. How many people want to eat an evening meal on the 25th of December? Not many, because the main meal in the middle of the day has been so big and so rich. No one wants to do anything that night. Number 4, if he was stressed, if he was anxious, that really slowed digestion down. And number 5, if he drank alcohol with the meal. And what Dr. Beaumont found, that the only time that Alexis St. Martin really got annoyed with Dr. Beaumont going in and out of his stomach was if he'd had alcohol the night before. And how many people today can just about tick all of those? And then they go and say they've got a very upset stomach, and then they're given antacids. What's going to break the food down now? So let's go back to the stomach. This is, at the end of the stomach is the pyloric sphincter. And that little pyloric sphincter is open when we wake up in the morning. That's why when you wake up in the morning, the best thing is water. When you drink water, it goes straight through and is used quickly by the body. It's the most dehydrated time of the whole day. And when you drink, ideally at least 2, maybe even 3 glasses of water before breakfast, you've got a nice thick mucosa on your stomach wall. You know you've got your digestive enzyme ready to go, and you can digest that meal very well. So going through the pyloric sphincter and into the stomach, and by the way, as soon as you smell food, sit down, pick up your knife and fork, say grace, then the digestive enzymes are released. And that's why our stomach doesn't get eaten, because they're only released at the table when we start to eat the food. That acid stomach is very, very important. Why would someone have not enough acid? Because they're eating all day long, because they're drinking with their meals, because the largest meal's the end of the day, because they're stressed with their meals. So you can turn that around by starting to give the stomach a break. Poor old stomach. But the enzyme that breaks down protein, and that's the only food that is broken down in the stomach, is protein. The enzyme is pepsin. So how can you boost digestion? You can boost digestion, boost the release of your digestive enzymes by drinking about 1/3 of a cup of water with 1/3 of a teaspoon of cayenne pepper in it. Throw that down, that'll wake anything up in the stomach. And you can also drink the juice of a lemon just before the meal. Another way is to drink 1/3 of a cup of hot ginger tea just before the meal, and that will boost hydrochloric acid. The hydrochloric acid is important because hydrochloric acid doesn't just connect with pepsinogen to release pepsin. Hydrochloric acid is also antifungal, it's antibacterial, so it's also, and as you'll see when we look at our immune system on Friday night, it's one of the frontline defences in our immune system. So no, the acid is very important. What about children? Can they go the distance between the meals? Well, I just told you the story of this lady I met today in her 40s, and that's the only way she ever ate as a child. And when I was in Andalusia, the northern part of southern Spain last year, I stayed in a home with 5 children, 2-year-old, 4-year-old, 6-year-old, 8-year-old, and I think 10-year-old. Those 5 children eat 2 meals a day. They have breakfast at, I think, 8:39. Then they have another main meal 2 or 3 o'clock. Now, the little 2-year-old that you would think might struggle with that distance, he has his daytime nap in the middle of the day. So when he's waking up, he's given water and then ready for the meal. Do you know they were happy children? They weren't thin, they weren't overweight, they were great, and so all the signs show that what a great way to feed a child. Do you know that's the way I raised my children? I remember my children always used to eat a salad. That was the first thing we ate. You always give them the food that they're least likely to eat first, and they haven't eaten for a few hours, so they're hungry. Bread never